Saul D'Alessio was a fallen man, a gambler and a drunk. Saul reached the lowest point in his life when he lost a bet he could not repay. At the time, the local betting house was run by the Lucky Horseshoe, a gambling guild whose influence spanned almost the entire length of the continent. To avoid defaulting on his payment, Saul took to robbing merchants travelling on the road from Beetleton to Shaymore. Though he successfully paid his debt to the Lucky Horseshoe, he was eventually fingered by one of his victims and tried as a thief. His punishment was exile from the kingdom of Kryta. The local authorities blindfolded him and rode him out 3 full weeks before leaving him to fend for himself. Alone, broke and lost, Saul wandered through a dense forest for several days, surviving on only roots and berries. On the 4th day, delirious with hunger, Saul emerged from the trees to see what he thought was a hallucination. A city of massive towers reaching into the heavens. The architecture was astounding, and the creatures who lived here were unlike any he had ever seen. Walking down into their city, Saul got a closer look at the denizens of this place. They were tall and thin, with strange wing-like appendages that waved about in the slightest breeze. When they walked, their feet seemed not to touch the ground, and when they spoke, it was the most melodious sound he had ever heard. Surely these creatures were the stuff of divinity. Hungry and exhausted, his clothes ragged and dirty, Saul dropped to his knees and touched his forehead to the ground. He had found his gods, and they in turn had found their most devoted disciple. Saul D'Alessio returned to Kryta a changed man. His rags had been replaced with a sleeveless, pure white robe embroidered with golden thread. His once sunken, sickly features were again full and healthy. He no longer craved the bottle, no longer wished to strike it rich gambling. His life had purpose. He had returned to spread the word, to deliver his finding to the humans of Kryta. During this time, the Krytan Empire was in the midst of 2 wars, one against the guilds of the other human nations and another against the beast-like Char. Food was becoming scarce as the invaders burned the crops and salted the fields. It was then that Saul came to the people, offering help from his powerful, enigmatic gods. Saul's new faith was so powerful that soon he had a small following. As a group, they traveled the land, recruiting more and more, offering salvation from trying times. Though no one ever saw the winged gods or their cities of massive towers, they took Saul at his word that they truly did exist. Saul was a shepherd, and his sheep followed his every step. Those who showed real conviction were given white robes, each embroidered with golden thread. This was the beginning of the White Mantle. Beaten, outnumbered, leaderless, and facing almost certain death, the people of Kryta looked to Saul to lead them out of their darkest hour. Saul D'Alessio was transformed from a messenger into the general of a great army. With their new faith and their new leader, Kryta and the White Mantle managed to push out the Char, forcing them back over the mountains. Though his efforts were successful, Saul eventually lost his life fighting the war that freed the humans of Kryta. In the last offensive of the war against the Char, Saul led his troops deep into Char territory. His networks of spies, though normally quite effective, failed him on this day. The Char were waiting in ambush, and the beastly creatures slaughtered Saul's unit to the man.
The Unseen Ones brought Saul a great victory. But their aid came at a price. The Unseen Ones killed all but their most devoted worshippers. And Saul learned to his horror that these new gods were neither good nor kind. The Unseen Ones took Saul with them to ensure his silence. He was never seen alive again, but the survivors spread the legend. and Saul D'Alessio would always be remembered as a champion of Kryta.
I'm just gonna take the cat right out of the bag here at the start, as without playing the wing, you really won't get the impact anyway, and it is also increasingly likely you've heard it already. The Bastion of the Penitent, the 4th raid wing to be added to Guild Wars 2, is a prison. It's a prison for Saul D'Alessio. This is huge. It's unbelievable. This is one of my personal ultimate stories to have been given details on in this franchise. If you had told me before Heart of Thorns came out, or hell, even when Heart of Thorns did come out, but before the first raid wing, that freaking Saul D'Alessio would be back in Guild Wars 2 story after that original article was written, what, way back in 2004? If you had told me it was coming into the game and it would be truly paid off on, I would never have believed you. This, for me, is on the same level as the other great mysteries in Guild Wars 2. It's like Baltec or What Happened to Avinia. It's about more details on Kunavang or Kanaxai or the other mysterious continents that we've seen on the globe but never visited. This is one of the greatest, coolest parts of Guild Wars lore to me as a person. These are awesome areas of the story I've wanted more detail on, but never had any faith that it would come true. And yet, Saul has. How fucking epic. It's funny, I've been asked about this so many times over the years about Saul by you guys on how I'd feel about him coming back, and I've actually been mixed on occasion at the prospect. See, I care a lot about this story. The thought that Saul D'Alessio would return sort of scares me. The idea that it might come back but only as some half-assed or poorly implemented story arc, like we saw with the release content in 2012, didn't really excite me. If they were gonna do Saul, I needed them to do it right. And do you know what? They did. We got Saul in a raid. In a raid! I know for some people this is a huge turnoff, but it's actually the opposite for me. For those lucky of us who have the time to give Guild Wars 2 raiding a real shot, the raids don't simply offer some experience of the story. They offer the best story this franchise can currently muster. ArenaNet haven't been content to lazily graft some thin excuse for a plot over their raid wings to serve nothing more than just an excuse for gameplay. No. They make sure that both areas of this content get real attention. Story in raids is story done right. There is frequent alternate dialogue that you get based on your race or class. These are mysterious and epic environments that are tailor-made to suit the narrative at hand, not just reusing open world locations. You get genuinely intimidating and harrowing opponents as their difficulty in-game reflects their power in the story. You get optional clues and countless interactable objects littered throughout the region, hinting at future stuff and underlying stories. You get unique music made just for specific boss fights that you won't hear anywhere else, or until a lot later when they maybe reuse it, as we saw with this patch. And you get badass cutscenes too when you clear these wings and get to specific moments. All of this stuff, the raids deliver in spades. Now, there have been vast improvements to the story delivery in Living World Season 3, so I might not be able to make this following comment for much longer, but right now I do believe it. The raids right now for Guild Wars 2 are the best place to enjoy story. And so getting Saul D'Alessio in a raid is just about the one place I would have liked to have seen it. And that is what happened with the patch this week. Saul's a really interesting story piece. We already know that the developers are juggling about 1 million different plot points right now, and so there's this question of which ones deserve picking back up and being taken further or expanded on. As I played through this new raid wing, and the fact Saul was returning to the story became increasingly clear to me, this question, how far should they go with him, really started to play more and more on my mind. In the end, I do think that they did the right thing with him. And what was that? Well, let's get into it. Without further ado, I'd like to talk to you all about the lore of the Bastion of the Penitent. So, with the Head of the Snake release, we got this awesome little bit of detail on the patch notes. The new raid can be described as this. The Bloodstone explosion in Bloodstone Fen unearthed a portal to a place where few have been and none have escaped. Deconstruct the mysteries and learn the true story of one of history's most misunderstood figures. Assemble your squad and begin your journey at Ground Zero or at the Lion's Arch Aerodrome. There appear to be two very large different components to this raid wing as far as the story is concerned. First, you're going to have the experience of actually going through the wing and beating the bosses and the dialogue you get as you travel through this compound. Second, and very importantly, there are a lot of optional areas in this raid wing and extra achievements that you get on top of it at the end. I think what the developers are doing here is trying to give as many players as much opportunity to experience this story as possible. And by doing this, they're allowing non-raiders to move into an already cleared instance and go and explore it for themselves and have meaningful things to do in there and achievements to get for themselves, reason to examine the environment and visit totally new places without actually having to grind against the 10-man really hardcore stuff, which is pretty off limits to some of us. So this video today is purely about that original raid storyline and not the optional stuff. I haven't even done the optional stuff yet. I'm coming to make this video because I'm so excited about it already, and I'll go do the optional stuff later, and that will be in a separate video later. But if you guys don't want to wait for it, bear in mind, once you finish today's, you can get in there and experience some of this story now for yourself and take it a bit further and find those extra optional places. It's something I think a lot of people should appreciate that the devs have tried here, because there's a lot of discussion about how much story should really be in these raids, right? Anyway, over to the story. So it all starts with a portal in Bloodstone Fen, as we know, and this takes us to a very interesting region of the world. It ports us miles away. It takes us to the Verdant Cascades. This already is quite wild. Now, we only really get to experience very little of the Verdant Cascades as a region, because most of this raid wing takes place underground in a secret hidden prison. So it's not really like we've got to explore that region of the world properly. We don't know what the trees look like there. We don't know really anything about the exploration, but it is a cool area to move to. It's on the doorstep of the Isles of Janthir, a speculated homeland of the Massart, or at least in connection with the Massart. And so to have a prison so tightly close to the Massart as well in the Verdant Cascades is an awesome leaping point to start from. Like the Rising Flames release, this then marks now the second time another trip to a totally new region of Tyria in something like a Living World patch, and I'm very happy about that. I kind of like the idea of us being underground too, because I want the Verdant Cascades, when we properly explore them, to get expansion budget type treatment with lots of totally new beautiful varieties of trees and bushes and shrubs and whatever. That's kind of my dream scenario, but it's very cool that we got to go to the Verdant Cascades. Whether that has too much more relevance, I doubt it. The original story we heard with Saul, though, does describe him being marched 3 straight weeks out of Kryta. Well, people have speculated for a long time that perhaps that was to the north, and then maybe it's a cheeky, subtle little sign then that this prison that he eventually gets trapped in also ended up being in maybe that same region of the world. At least I think that that perhaps could be some kind of a small reference, but nothing confirms it. So the main character we're running along with in this wing is Glenna. Glenna was the female Asura that hung out with us in the previous raid as well, which was almost a different story. And she comes back, I guess she comes back because people liked her, and maybe she'll be in all of the raids. Maybe she'll be the figurehead of a lot of the raids until eventually she dies in some dramatic moment, but that certainly doesn't happen here. She comes through with us, and much of the story here is conversations with Glenna. That's what a lot of this video is going to be.
I'd be disappointed if otherwise. Not that I actually want to encounter another horrific surprise, but it seems appropriate.
I actually already did a video showcasing the initial dialogue, so I'm not going to go over that again here. You can click the link on the screen if you want to check it out. But in short, we are in a cave. We see that there's a random Massart construct here, and Glenna openly speculates that the White Mantle or Massart might be related to this construct, and they may have indeed used that portal. We don't see any White Mantle in this entire wing, guys, so maybe the White Mantle never did come here, even though there was a connection in Bloodstone Fen, or perhaps some of them were here, but they just moved on very quickly because their objective was never to get into the jail. Their objective was, I don't know, the Isles of Janthir, perhaps, who knows. And then, of course, we have the other big thing, the main part of the story here. There's a mysterious floating eye above the first boss. Glenna explains that she thinks it's kind of weird. She's got theories about it, but nothing solid. It turns out, guys, that yes, that is the Eye of Janthir. So not only has Saul become a thing here in this patch, but the Eye of Janthir has had reference again and come back into the game. This is an artifact we saw in a single mission way back in Guild Wars 1 when the original game first came out, that was in use by the White Mantle to detect magical aptitude. People who were good at casting magic, or people who had a lot of magic within them, perhaps. And it seems like a very useful device that maybe the Massart might have constructed long ago to combat the Elder Dragons, maybe to assist in things like creating the Bloodstones. But we've had no confirmation on that, and you guys should be fairly familiar with the theories. But the Eye of Janthir does appear. As far as we understood before now, the Eye of Janthir wasn't a sentient thing. It never spoke or had its own thoughts or would move necessarily outside of just following a particular person. But this wing shows it moving on its own deeper into the complex every time you beat a boss. And that's exactly what happens after you defeat the first guy, the Jade Construct. It's super cool to hear Glenna offer the same speculations that players do after this has happened, and you ask her a little bit more specifically about it.
I want to know more about that thing we're chasing.
I have a theory, but it's controversial. If I could only get closer.
What do you think it is?
It's the Eye of Janthir. I've seen drawings of it at the Priory, but don't think anyone's actually seen it in centuries. Not much is known about it, though some believe it has connections to the Massart. Long ago, the White Mantle used it to identify humans of extraordinary magical aptitude, whom they deemed the Chosen. This title wasn't as illustrious as it sounded. The Chosen were rounded up, hauled away, and sacrificed on a bloodstone. By most accounts, the eye hasn't been seen since 1072 or so. No one can agree on what became of it. Some hypothesize that it was lost during a skirmish between White Mantle and Shining Blade forces. Others think it retreated to the Isle of Janthir, or maybe to wherever the Massart came from. Nobody knows, except us, because we just found it.
Before we move fully on from boss number 1, there isn't too much to say about the fight itself. I mean, there is, but not related to the story. I would suggest maybe, though, that this is directly from the Massart. See, we fought things like this before, but they have been things that the White Mantle in modern-day Tyria have repowered, like Matthias and his crew repowered them. I think that this Jade Construct we fight in this raid wing isn't a repowered one. It's one from way back when. It's one that the Massart had tended to themselves, and maybe this explains why it is such a freaking badass. There's also something very cool. In the area, you see all this like celestial goop splattered about. You see stars and weird portals to other areas. One of the main mechanics of the fight involves us hiding on one of these celestial looking skill effects to avoid a giant explosion of damage. And I think the idea here, guys, is that we're sort of stepping out of phase with reality. We're doing what the Massart once did. A huge part of the Massart story is that they blink and hid off in the mists, and I think that we're seeing, because we're in a very heavily Massart influenced compound right now, we're seeing that take its toll on the environment, and that's kind of a mechanic right there in the first fight. We'll talk more about that pretty soon. So, moving on, we go deeper. Now that we've defeated the guard, the gatekeeper, we can actually enter the prison.
Accelerating! All right. Lead the way.
Follow me.
Oh, great. Of course we'd have to find a dead body.
Not my fault.
I see we're late to the party.
Totally not my fault.
Would you stop that already?
No.
This place is depressing.
Were you expecting a holiday retreat in South Sun or something? Cheer up, things could be worse. At least you're not an impaled, dehydrated husk.
Who or what would kill these prisoners and leave them like this?
No idea, but whatever attacked them was mighty angry. Not all of the scattered rubble was caused by natural degradation. Some of the cell bars were torn from the wall. An earthquake didn't cause that.
You can bet your astrochemical anomalizer that they were staging a riot. Look around. Who's responsible for all this carnage? This is obviously a murder scene.
What gave that away? The faint aroma of dried skin, or that we're surrounded by skewered people?
Again with the jokes.
Sorry, coping mechanism. But to your point, it looks as if the perpetrator forced his way into the room. The passageway to the next room is blocked by debris. But if you'll turn your attention toward the ceiling, you may notice a rather large hole. Look at the positions of the bodies. I'm willing to bet most of them were hit at range from that perch. I assume that time has converted this place from a prison to a tomb. There's a good chance our murderer is long dead.
Let's hope so. Who do you think these prisoners were?
I'm not sure. From what I've seen so far, there are a lot of human bodies, but also those of other races.
Yeah, I think there may have been Jotun here. Maybe others too. I don't think ordinary criminals would be held in such a high security place. Maybe they were political prisoners.
True. The fact that this prison is underground and only accessible by portals suggests
That someone wanted to keep their captives extremely isolated. But why?
so there would be no chance of escape. Or perhaps they wanted to experiment on them, interrogate them, etc. Being in my line of work, I have a high tolerance for the macabre, but this place is starting to get under my skin. I can't really explain it, but I feel like we're constantly being watched. We already know about the eye, but what else is still here?
The characters around, and by looking at the place with all of the walls blown off and just disarray and disrepair everywhere, the characters actually speculate that this wasn't earthquakes and things that did this. This wasn't just the passage of time. This is the result of a prison riot, that some chaos descended upon this place at some point and broke a bunch of prisoners out, and a bunch of prisoners got killed. Loads of people have been slain with spears. These spears, by the way, are fashioned in the shape of the Eye of Janthir as their head, and that pattern appears all over the facility, markings representing the Eye of Janthir, so it clearly has a great tie to this location. I've also heard from Brazil, another YouTuber, that there's a lot of New Crichton written on them, but I haven't translated that myself. Maybe we'll get to that later. It would be really weird that New Crichton's written on anything, to be honest, because New Crichton's quite a new language, but hey, maybe we can just ignore that. So yeah, there's been a prison riot. Lots of people have been slayed by a mysterious character, and it's important to look at what the bodies themselves are. There's a Jotun body.
This appears to be a multiracial incarceration facility.
Let's see what we just found.
Humans, Jotun. Who else is being kept here?
The fact that there are Jotun bodies in this compound is super interesting. Remember the first encounter that there was celestial looking stuff to do with the stars? Well, the Jotun were, when they were at the height of their civilizations, renowned as stargazers, and ArenaNet have never really developed very deeply on what that could potentially mean. I wonder if the Masat were a little bit more responsible for the path of the Jotun and their fall as a race than we before knew about. Why did the Masat have Jotun prisoners? Either way, the concept of a Jotun political prisoner is exceptionally cool to me, because, I mean, we know them as just mindless, stupid brutes, but the idea that this could be some great king of the Jotun or something that's been captured for political reasons kind of tickles my brain in all the right ways. There are lots of interactable things here in the prison that are all interesting in their own ways, such as...
This isn't a shiv. A prisoner didn't forge this. Judging from the trajectory of these spears, the attacker struck from a precise location. But where was he situated?
Either of those two pieces of little dialogue. The dagger comment is particularly curious to me. Later, the raid is actually going to give us a definitive, concrete answer as to why everyone's dead with spears. But then, what's going on with the blade? Maybe this has something to do with the optional achievement, as indeed there are a couple of things in the area that I do know have related to that, and that's the content I haven't played yet, will appear in the next video. But there is definitely some cool stuff here. A really cool one would be this. Probably my favorite, made me geek out hard.
These clothes wouldn't fit a bipedal individual, and whoever wore the garment left scales behind on the fabric. It's almost as if they fit a serpentine creature. Did a crate wear this? Or some other being?
Which seems to not be hinting at a crate, guys, but at a Forgotten. These are characters we've heard so much talk about. These are the people who worked in alliance with Glint and created the Exalted. So many references to the Forgotten. One of the ancient races, interacted a lot with Massart. Funnily, in a recent patch with Rising Flames, there was some suggestion that the Massart and the Forgotten were in an alliance together. And now we hear that the Massart had a Forgotten, at least one Forgotten prisoner incarcerated within one of their facilities. That is pretty crazy. I cannot wait to see some Forgotten in Guild Wars 2, and they keep throwing little hints at them all over the place. Absolutely brilliant. So yeah, there is some other stuff. We won't get too bogged down in that, again, because I'm fairly certain that that's something for further exploration that we'll do in the second video, or maybe you guys can do yourselves if you like. Eventually, in the prison, you do find a shovel. And you can use this to dig in various areas of loose earth and reveal some chests, super adventure box style. Or you can use the shovel to, it's kind of like a little puzzle section. It's not a formal encounter of the raid, but it's an extra little thing that your 10 players will do, where eventually you'll find a wall that you can break through by repeatedly hitting it, and you'll get into the next room. I think this is really cool as well, by the way. Lots of little flavorful, fun, non-encounter moments in the raids that really up the ante of the exploration and give more story outside of just fight. It's a really, really, really nice touch, and I really appreciate stuff like this. I want to see a lot more. This feels a lot more like Wing 1 than, say, Wing 2 or 3, which is a very good move, in my opinion. So, we move on into the next room. There's a little bit of dialogue as we walk in, which unfortunately I don't have a recording of, where Glenna will remark that it looks like we're in a game room that reminds her of Polymock. So Polymock was an Asuran pastime that we got to know well and truly in Guild Wars 1. Seemed like it was going to be a Guild Wars 2 minigame, and then just got thrown to the side in development at some point and very rarely gets referenced. Actually, some Black Lion audio was data mined recently that they had played with it, but it's never come into Guild Wars 2. I love references to Polymock, but even cooler than this, the Polymock comment, it's like another comparison between Asura and Massart. We get them so frequently. Ratasum, even as a name of a place, is an anagram for Massart. Think about the recent Fractal storyline with Ark trying to build a sanctuary, perhaps, in the mists to escape the dragons, just like, oh yeah, the Massart tried to seemingly hide from the dragons in the mist. It's so awesome to see little references like that, and again, maybe a bit stupid, but that was another thing that I quite enjoyed. But what this room is, it's called the Recreation Room. It's some evil Massart constructed area to tease and test inmates, and perhaps to amuse themselves, as Glenna speculates.
That game room turned out to be a bit more dangerous than I'd expected.
I suppose the prison crowd gets its kicks a little differently than you or I.
I get the feeling it was more about entertaining the guards, or humiliating the prisoners.
Agreed. Whoever got locked in that room was probably a very bad inmate.
Or on the warden's special list.
Perhaps, though I'd imagine anyone trapped in there wouldn't survive long. I can only imagine what the room was for, but the fact that the pieces looked like jade constructs.
This place is looking more and more like some cruel Massart creation.
It's starting to make sense that we've found human, Jotun, and possibly forgotten remnants here. Our hosts were far from hospitable, and they didn't seem to care much for any lives but their own.
So the second encounter of the wing is actually to play this game, and the mechanics of playing the game really aren't important for the story whatsoever. I mean, it's amazing, it's very cool, and I've got a video coming about that for you guys, which you can check out if you like. But for our purposes, just understand this: the game activates, we defeat the game, and the Eye of Janthir, who had been present in the Recreation Room, moves on again. So every encounter, the Eye of Janthir is stood there looking at you, waiting, watching, and then when you beat the encounter, it just moves deeper into the facility, and we opt to follow it.
This place is oppressive. The smells, the sounds. I can almost feel the prisoner's misery.
It's not unheard of for traumatic events to leave behind some negative energy, shades of the past, as it were. Sometimes spirits will linger long after they're dead, like in the Forsaken Thicket and some pockets of Charlands. But this place is especially grim. It's as if the walls themselves have absorbed decades of abuse. While you were in the chest room, I saw something move. My eyes are playing tricks on me. Or we're peering at snippets of the past. Either way, this place isn't normal.
So again, just like with the prison sequence, we get another bit of a little puzzle here. So there's a locked door in front of us. I really like this, just like the prison shovel bits, but I don't understand it that well because of something quite awesome that happened. See, you can either hunt in the environment and try and find what I believe is 4 keys or something to open the door properly, or if you're playing with a thief, and not many raid groups run with thieves, especially not in progression, and especially not so early to have figured this out. If you're running with a thief, someone on that class can simply interact with the door and pick the lock. No other class can do it, only the thief can, but that allows you to bypass that little bit of the dungeon, and your thief character will say, oh, door, meet picklock, and then you go through. And so our little group actually, one of the times when we went through, we just skipped this entire part with the door because our thief naturally walked up to it and he opened it up. So there you go, a bit of incentive for thieves, guys. Thief is now meta for Wing 4, right? So I do think that's awesome. I think that we should get more of that. It's just like in Wing 3 where Mesmer's talked about being envious of Zira's power and so forth. More. So many of the raid wings need just tons of this. It's so awesome. It's that kind of love and quality of life that I think really starts to shine through.
I want to know more about the Eye.
I'm with you. This is a huge discovery.
If the Eye is monitoring this place, it must be involved in running it somehow.
We have to determine its role, its motivation, its contribution to this
awful place of torture.
Thanks. I was struggling to find the right words.
We've made it this far. We can't give up now.
Agreed.
Anyway, so going through the door reveals what this ominous thing is that had killed everyone during the prison riots. It was a prisoner itself. It was a character called Samurog. So, Samurog is encounter number 3. Pretty terrifying beast. They did a lot to set him up. I cut quite a lot of Glenna dialogue out, actually. That's even more ominous, foreboding stuff dealing with this guy. Beautiful room that he's in with all these spears everywhere. There's that beautiful balcony out the back. This is supposedly the warden's office. I'll explain a little bit more of what goes on here in a second. But again, the encounter itself we can largely skip over. One interesting thing that happens, though, as you are fighting Samurog, he actually conjures some allies to help him out. Other prisoners, former prisoners. One of them's a human, and the other one is a Jotun. And so these two characters, the human and Jotun, are supposedly acting against their will. They are being forced into servitude by Samurog, and as they fight against you, the Jotun and the human say, "We're sorry, we shouldn't be fighting against you. He was like us." And they kind of regretfully have to be slain. That's pretty huge, by the way. What we just did there in this wing then is we killed an ancient Jotun who was presumably the lone survivor of a lost civilization that was once great and has now fallen, and could have told us an immense epic amount of stuff about the world, but we just straight up slew him. Oh dear. But, so yeah, we have to kill him because of Samurog controlling them. And then, after a really grueling, really difficult fight, we kill Samurog himself. The Eye of Janthir witnesses this happen and moves on to the 4th and final encounter.
What an abomination. What was that creature?
If its puppets were to be believed, it used to be a prisoner here. Did you see its broken shackles? I may not know from experience, but I've read a few papers on correctional facilities. Sometimes exceptional inmates are given jobs or responsibilities. Perhaps that one was in charge of the others. And when the prison masters left him to his own devices, he, took his job extra seriously.
But what was it? I've never seen such a creature.
Eat my dust!
Nor have I.
So this seems plausible enough, definitely, and I love that they say they don't know what Samurog is as a creature. This is a really weird thing. We've never seen it. But what makes it so fascinating to me, beyond the fact he just looks cool, is it was in a Massart prison, right? So then was it some kind of threat to the Massart? Is it some kind of fauna, perhaps, from where the Massart live in their homelands? Or did they find it out in the mists? Why wouldn't they just kill it? Why would they put it in a prison like this? Will we ever find out? Are there going to be more of these in the game? Considering that it's this totally cool, unique animated thing, I can't imagine they'll let it sit here collecting dust forever in the raid. Maybe we will find other versions of Samurog out there and get answers one day. Either way, I think this thing is freaking awesome, and it's nice to have some kind of new beast character, like a totally unclassified type of enemy, come into the game here. Glenna also, at this point, talks a little bit more about the eye.
Those minions were in terrible pain.
You did them a favor.
Strong.
Now they're at rest. The more we explore this place, the more unsettled I feel. It's like we're close to the center now. I'm almost certain the eye is nearby, watching and waiting like we're another of its prisoners.
Do you think the Eye is acting on behalf of the Massart?
Undoubtedly. It identified Chosen hundreds of years ago. I bet it was and still is somehow responsible for this prison. I never thought a freaky floating eye could be such a terrifying entity.
And I think her conclusion there, that it might still be working on behalf of the Massart, is a really fascinating one. The fact that Glenna says it suggests to me that the writers are thinking it, and suggests to me that because, spoilers, the eye is going to survive this wing, we might not have seen the last of it, and that there could still be more Massart out there doing things beyond just Lazarus the Dyer. There have been suggestions so far that there are still more Massart alive, hiding out in the mists or elsewhere, but this is the most direct way that Guild Wars 2 recently has really set up, yeah, there could be more Massart around. The eye is still doing stuff, so maybe it's related to other remaining Massart. Lazarus is not the be-all and end-all, and that's pretty fascinating. And finally, Glenna does finish up with a little comment about the star fields we've been seeing, particularly at the start in the original encounter.
Have you noticed the star fields? Felt the celestial energy? It's like this place is on the edge of our plane. Like we're touching the skin of Tyria.
Which is an amazing thought. Again, I think about Janthir, and I think about how Janthir looks on the world map and how it looks destroyed. And I look at how close we are and how far away we are from other areas of civilization that we've known so far. And I think about what cost it might have been to Tyria when the Massart slipped out of phase and left and to go to the mists. This dialogue certainly feeds into the final fight, which, contrary to all the other fights in this wing so far, the final fight has a lot of story in it. So let's dive in, shall we?
Leave now, or you'll make him angry.
The final fight is in one of the deepest areas of the prison. It features a huge circular platform surrounded by space on all sides, so that anyone, I guess, who was imprisoned on it couldn't get away without falling to their death or falling into a miasmic haze below. And in the very center of the platform is a man grotesquely chained up, and the point of interest for the area describes this location as solitary confinement. This person is just known as an unidentified prisoner at the beginning of the encounter. So this is a special person in solitary confinement kept away from the rest. Looking closely, you'll see he's all ragged, and he's worn down, and he's old. And the eye is there too. When the fight begins and everybody moves up, several ghosts are going to spawn on the platform and try and move into the middle. These ghosts are named Greed and Pride, and they're going to be moving over to the prisoner. It's your task to defend the prisoner from all of these ghosts. If they get to him, then the prisoner takes damage. Maybe this is suggesting somehow that he's being haunted by his past, by what his greed and, more importantly, what his pride ended up costing him. Maybe these two things led to him being here in this prison. It's very important to note that as you enter the arena, this man shouts at you.
Spark to flame.
What are you doing? You'll let him out.
Well, we don't know who him is right now, but we move onto the platform anyway. Either way, very shortly into this fight, something very different happens. For the entire wing, all the Eye has been doing is watching us. But now, at last, it does something. It actually interacts with us in the fight. An ominous voice rings out. We don't know what the ominous voice is, but the voice says, "The Eye has chosen its sacrifice." And at this moment, the Eye will select a player in the group and all nearby players, and it will teleport them out of Tyria. Yes, seriously, holy crap. I can only speculate at what this means, at what you're seeing here. If this is anything more than just fun mechanics for the fight, it is nothing like what we've seen the Eye was capable of doing in Guild Wars 1. Basically, players are teleported at this point in the fight, guys, to alternate dimension version of the same area. It's a platform, again, a circular platform, and again, it has something caged in the middle of it. Except, this time, instead of it being a ragged man caged in the middle, it's a huge demon. Demon, by the way, is a good term for this here, as we appear to be in the mists, right? A hellish, horrible area of the mists, but the mists nonetheless. And demons in Guild Wars lore are cruel and horrible entities that are born from the mists. So where, if it is the mists, in the mists, is this? The realm of torment, maybe? But Cormier took that over and made it nice, right? Is it the underworld? Is it a certain place in the Fissure of Woe? Somewhere else? Do we not even describe this as the Mist? What if this is just a planet, but it's not Tyria? What if it's that destroyed planet we saw represented on the Harbinger and the Fractal of the Mist, or where the humans came from, or where the Massat had been hiding? Super interestingly, by the way, speaking of fractals, the animation that teleports players up and down from this alternate dimension into the real world as this fight goes on is the same animation that you get as you move through different fractals in the mists, and it's the same animation that plays on the giant mysterious Colossus in the Cliffside fractal too. As you free him, he bows at you and teleports away. There's an obvious theme with the wing here. It's playing a lot with the Massat. The Massat were the people to escape into the mists, and we're seeing that we're on the edge of Tyria. Is this where they went? Why is it so goddamn grim now? Are we in a place where there's still a bulk of Massat civilization? I don't know. All of the questions excite me though, but we don't quite have answers. Now, while you're in this alternate world, you can actually break free the 4 chains that are holding this demon closed. Each chain you break in the alternate world is at the same time breaking a chain off of the man in the real world. If you break all of them, you set the demon free and you set the man free. And that we were warned not to do. Holy crap, he looks cool. Woo! Alright, so this is the moment of revelation. This is the final fight, guys. In the chaos of this moment here, it is revealed that Saul D'Alessio was the chained man. He was kept alive and imprisoned for 250 years. This is the payoff of about a decade of a Guild Wars mystery setup. This is what I, as a player, have been waiting for so long. Confirmation that Saul D'Alessio was back in Guild Wars 2, and here he is fighting alongside us. The music kicks it up a notch, the adrenaline gets going, and Demos cries,
Maximum pain. Feel the burn.
So that's pretty interesting, right? It suggests that Saul D'Alessio was a prisoner because after the Massat stole him away in that cutscene you saw at the start of this video way back when, Saul never obeyed them? He never cooperated? Well, then that suggests that the Massat actually wanted Saul to do something for them, no? That Saul wasn't just taken immediately to the prison, but Saul was taken to do something with or for the Massat. He didn't obey, and then he was thrown in the prison. So what was that? Are they ever gonna tell us? The use of the word obey is pretty epic as well too, guys, because obey is kind of a big white mantle associated thing, and perhaps now we see that this came from the Masart, or from this demon creature, Deimos. And that's another point too. So, is Deimos a creature made by the Masart? Is it a Masart? Is it something more? Is it in alliance with them? What is it? What's the connection? Another very cool thing at this moment, now that we're fighting with Saul, Saul is actually using his bonus mission pack skills. Yeah, so that cutscene from the start of the video is the bonus mission pack in Guild Wars 1, where you could play as Saul and you had a very specific skill bar. You had an ability called Unnatural Signet on you, you had Bane Signet, you had a banner on you, and in this fight, guess what Saul D'Alessio in Guild Wars 2 is doing? He's using these abilities. He's able to stun Deimos with presumably the Bane Signet and the Castigation Signet, and he drops a banner and he uses Unnatural Signet. It is so cool that they did that throwback right there, and was definitely not lost on me as this fight began. So the boss is this demon. He's called Deimos. It's very interesting to me that they set up this duality between Saul and this demon. They were both locked up and they were both tied together, but as to what that duality means, I don't really know. As to the origin himself or purpose of Deimos, it's not clear. I always knew of Deimos, as a word by the way, as being one of the moons of Mars, to be honest, which did make me geek out a bit. We had a raid boss named after it now, fine, but I think it's more likely a reference to the Greek god who was kind of a symbol for terror and fear, and I guess that makes sense because this guy is pretty goddamn scary. As Saul fights by your side, you fight Deimos. Periodically, the Eye will keep throwing people into the shadow world or the mists or the Masart homeworld or whatever you want to call it or whatever you want to think of it. The Eye is actively trying to get you killed by sending you to this other dimension, and the only way you can survive up there is by killing monsters and bringing them back into the real world with you, where you finally slay them. So the Eye clearly doesn't like us. After all this silent, menacing, frightening watching, it's actively trying to kill us here at the same time as Deimos. As a big part of the fight, every time you go into this alternate dimension, you see shadow versions of Saul up there. They represent his three vices. There is Saul the drunk, Saul the gambler, and Saul the thief. The three things that original story referenced in its opening line way back when. Each time you bring one of these characters back to the real world and you defeat them. And as you do so, Saul is telling his story in the middle of the fight.
Feel the burn, blast free!
Seriously.
Let it!
I was a slave to the
Water's
law.
free!
I was desperate and turned to thievery to pay my creditors. But I could not outrun my guilt. I was caught for my crimes. I was left for
Feel
dead
the burn, blast
until the
free!
Masat found me.
Oh man, like they mixed the mechanics and the story so well here. I particularly love the line when he says, "And then the Masart found me." It's just so menacing, and it's so cool to see them talking about something I've had in my headcanon for so long. And finally, because we, the players, are such freaking badasses, and I cannot stress to you guys how hard this boss can be to learn when all 10 of you are learning it for the first time. Once you have ground this insane boss down to 10% health, and he's on the last of his legs, Deimos retreats back to where he came from. Furious, he takes all of you with him, living Saul D'Alessio included.
Ready to rock! Wash the pain away! Feel the burn! Getting healthy!
You have no power over me!
Let it!
Holy fuck. Words cannot describe the adrenaline I experienced here. Having all of the gameplay meld together with such cool story stuff was so awesome. And here in this shadow world, you make your last stand, grinding Deimos, finally down, and this is the end of the wing.
Invigorate!
This all my fault. The Mossad betrayed us and murdered my men, and then dragged me to this terrible place. I've been trapped here, tormented by my own demons, paralyzed by the shame of selling out my people. The Eye kept me alive and used my guilt to try to break me down, force me to be the Mossad's puppet. Now, I'm free.
I'd always considered the founder of the White Mantle as some kind of monster. Now I know he was just a flawed person, tortured by his guilt and haunted by his mistakes. That man suffered for more than 200 years in this cesspit. Nobody deserves that.
We have a saying in the Priory. History is like a pair of dice, many-sided and loaded with chance. Every story has multiple angles. Most of us just accept what we're taught, but that can be dangerous. But let's be honest, Saul was no paragon. Let's just say the man had issues before his Mossad betrayal. But to your point, it seems clear that he tried to reform himself and help his people drive out the Char invasion.
The Mantle started off as a protective militia, but once the Mossad took over, they became oppressors.
Regardless, if Saul is to be believed, the White Mantle he founded was very different from what it became. At least now Mr. D'Alessio is free. May he find comfort in the afterlife.
See to it that Saul's body is interred on Crichton soil. Don't bother notifying the Seraph. That would complicate matters. I'd imagine the Queen's people would rather see his corpse destroyed, or have it displayed as a trophy. I sincerely doubt they'd be interested in learning about the man. That would just complicate their narrative.
I see you've taken up politics. Nasty business, isn't it?
And considering the current dysfunction of the White Mantle, we shouldn't talk to them either.
I'll treat this as a Priory matter of the highest secrecy then. Glad to know we're on the same wavelength. I'll see to it that his remains are handled respectfully, though it may take some time.
So that's that. My overall impressions are that this was pretty fantastic. Oh my god, as I said, this was a story I was waiting on for too long, I feel, and I think they definitely did do it justice. And just to think now that they did so well on this, I'm not just excited about what came today, but I might be even more excited about the future wings they drop in. I mean, we're all familiar with the idea that we might get a raid wing in the Wizard's Tower, right? If this is the kind of story we can expect when they pay off on a mystery like that, I think I might faint. There are a few things that I would love to talk about for a second here instead of just geeking out with you guys. First is the direction they took the story. So they were treating Saul as a misunderstood character and a hero really, or a tragic kind of character, instead of just raw evil. They could have taken Saul in a very different direction with this development here. They could have gone two different angles. I think this was the better one. He's been properly humanized, and I think that that's what the original story about him was always trying to tap into. And it's a very fitting thing, considering Saul was a very nuanced and weird character with two sides to him, and he is the founder of the White Mantle, a faction who is also, you know, very conflicted these days when you look at the Mantle of today and what happened in the main story of this patch. And another thing I really liked about what they did here is how much this has built up the Mossad. The Mossad still don't even appear in this wing. The Mossad, in combination with what's going on in the main story with the Living World stuff, like, they're so damn scary and cool now. while in Guild Wars 2, the Char and Azura have been well and truly neutered, becoming kitty cats and cute little mouse people, I think I can safely say the opposite has happened with the Massart. The Massart were badass in Guild Wars 1, sure, and they were very cool in Guild Wars 1, sure, but man, the plot in here, in this totally messed up prison, the strength and size of Deimos, the suggestion of this alternate reality, what the Massart have built, the Massart are on a totally new level now and have been raised to a new height of cool, and I do think that's very, very cool. As with other raids, there has been optional dialogue, by the way, throughout. Depending on your class or your race, you can hear different things. It keeps it fresh as you go and do your weekly clear. There's actually a Char one at the end, by the way, from that conversation you just heard, which goes slightly different. Listen to this.
It seems clear that he tried to reform himself and help his people drive out the Char invasion.
Hey, all is fair in war. The humans invaded our land, so we were just returning the favor.
Regardless, if Saul is to be believed, the White Mantle he founded was very different from what it became.
It's very interesting. This is the first time we've actually heard in the history of this franchise, in-game, a Char discussing their prior attack on Kryta. See, we hear a lot about the Char when they attacked Ascalon, yeah? And ArenaNet very much enjoy playing the whole, oh, the Char only attacked Ascalon because the humans attacked it and took it from them. They were just defending themselves. They like to play this kind of get out of jail free card a lot to make the Char nice instead of warmongers, so that everybody can get along and play nicely. But ArenaNet can't really play that happy card when they're dealing with the Char attack on Kryta. The Char attacked Kryta because they were aggressive, because they wanted the world, because they were greedy, because they were hungry, because they hated humans. So, and ArenaNet so rarely ever touch on that, right? They very, very rarely touch on that or their attack on Ore. So I have an awful lot of respect for in this raid wing that they went out of their way to have some optional Char voice chime in there when they really didn't have to. The so-called reason your player character gives for it is maybe a bit flippant, but right now in this story, it's not necessarily the time to get into the Char perspective on the Krytan War and so forth. It's just a very cool extra little hidden thing, and I guarantee there'll be more stuff like that, guys, that I haven't even managed to talk about in this video yet because the stuff's only just come out. It's interesting, by the way, I think we never got any optional Char dialogue during the actual fight too. There's something kind of amazing to me to think about a Char fighting to his last, fighting so desperately and hard against Deimos to defend Saul D'Alessio, when, if you think about it, the very last thing Saul D'Alessio did as a free man was slaughter hundreds, if not thousands of Char with spectral agony alongside the Massart. Like, Saul killed tons of Char and then got captured, and now he's being saved, potentially, by Char. Someone go clear this final instance, this final encounter with 10 Char party, please, just to see if there's an Easter egg. Thank you. And if not, maybe next time, ArenaNet? Come on, that would have been amazing. So yeah, I could keep talking about this forever. I'll leave it there so we don't get too rambly. At the start of this video, guys, I pointed out that there's a big question on what storylines deserve embellishment in Guild Wars 2 of today. Here we see that they brought Saul in and they killed him. I think that ultimately that was the right move. Sure, there could have been some epic, intricate thing where Saul was evil, or he had learned all this stuff, or Saul would have fought Lazarus at some point, or Saul was waiting for us in Janthir, or he was going to have a totally different reveal and be a much more bigger key player. But I don't think he needed all of that to have a satisfying conclusion. This, to me, even though Saul is dead and the story didn't develop in as many ways as it could have, this to me is still a really strong sign. This is an old mystery, this was something that was brought back, and no, it didn't become an epic centerpiece of the whole plot, but it was resolved, and it was resolved in a satisfactory way. I feel like almost we can close that book, and I'm happy enough with that there. Let the dude die. He's 250 years old, and they've already been a bit flippant about how he survived those 250 years. Oh, the eye did it isn't much of an answer. There are still a great many questions, and we shouldn't forget those. What was Saul not obeying? Why would the Massart ever have needed him in that way? Who was Deimos? What is this realm that they've introduced? And what about the Eye, which has moved on, perhaps, to more Massart allies?
So, about the Eye of Janthir.
A truly awful and cruel discovery, but an important one nonetheless. We still don't know its origins, only that it's somehow involved with the Mersat. Do they come from the same place? But at least we know a bit about its role here. It sustained Saul's life and those of the other prisoners. It peered into their minds, used their weaknesses and regrets to break them down. In short, it's nasty. But by killing its guards, you forced it to retreat. Somewhere. But without the aid of its life-sustaining powers, Saul's body quickly deteriorated. I would like to know more about the Eye, but I fear it's gone for good. A shame, really.
Well, is it really gone for good? Is that a quiet plea from the devs for us to shut up about it all now, while also handing us a bunch more mysteries? Or just maybe, do the answers lie in Janthir? Thanks very much for watching, guys. This has to have been one of my favorite videos to have made in a long time. I'd love to see what you make of this. I'm so happy I could bring you in the loop if you weren't able to play for yourself. Stay tuned for talks about the fights themselves and, oh yeah, the further exploration of the rest of the prison, which is now open to me, including new areas. Don't forget, you can take up that adventure for yourself too in-game. You don't need 10 people. You don't need to clear hardcore content. Just enter an already cleared instance and away you go. You can get a bunch of achievements and extra stuff not even I've seen yet. Or wait for my video. It's up to you.
Now that the miasma has lifted, we should be able to explore the floor below.
Considering what we've already experienced, I'm hesitant to venture much further. Before he passed, Saul spoke of the mental and physical tortures he endured. They wanted to break him down. Makes sense, since the Mersat would have had an easier time steering the mantle with its founder at the helm. Ironic that they left him here while they went off to meddle with human affairs only to be largely killed off. Even if he'd broken down and become their slave, the Mersat would have never returned to retrieve him. So he waited here, unaware that he'd never be freed. I wonder if he even knew how much time had passed. But I would imagine that there are still secrets to uncover, facts to find, etc.